The city awoke with a dull hum as dawn's light crept through the narrow alleys and over the dilapidated buildings. Ray, a 10-year-old boy with a mop of unruly dark hair and eyes too wise for his years, stirred from his makeshift bed of cardboard and old newspapers. The early morning chill bit at his skin, making him pull his thin, ragged coat tighter around his small frame. Ray's stomach growled, a constant reminder of his ceaseless hunger. He stood up, stretching his aching limbs, and looked around. The streets, his home since he could remember, were beginning to buzz with life. Other homeless children, some even younger than him, were starting their day of scavenging and begging. Ray's heart ached as he watched them. He knew their struggle all too well. With a sigh, he set off on his daily quest for food. The rich aromas from nearby bakeries teased his senses, a cruel reminder of what he couldn't have. Ray rummaged through trash bins, his hands deftly sorting through the waste for anything edible. As he moved, his mind wandered to the past, to fragmented memories of his parents. His father's rough hands and his mother's distant eyes, the vices that had consumed them, leaving him abandoned and alone. Lost in thought, Ray didn't notice the stray dog until it was too late. A scruffy mutt, just as desperate and hungry, lunged at the same piece of half-eaten sandwich he had spotted. Ray's reflexes kicked in, and he yanked the sandwich away, but the dog growled, baring its teeth. For a moment, boy and beast stared at each other, both unwilling to back down. Ray's stomach churned with hunger, but he couldn't bring himself to fight the dog. With a resigned sigh, he tossed the sandwich to the dog, watching as it devoured the morsel hungrily. "Enjoy," he muttered, moving on to the next bin. His own hunger pangs intensified, but he kept searching. Passing by the busy marketplace, Ray saw people bustling around, their faces a blur of indifference. He approached a vendor, eyes pleading silently for any leftovers. The vendor, a stout man with a kind face, tossed him an apple with a gruff, "Here, kid, now move along." Ray's heart leapt with gratitude. He clutched the apple close and ducked into an alley to savor every bite. The city was a harsh and unforgiving place, but Ray had learned to navigate its treacherous paths. As he ate, he spotted a younger boy, maybe 6 or 7, sitting alone with tears streaking his dirty cheeks. Ray's heart clenched. He knew that look of despair all too well. He approached the boy. "Hey, what's your name?" Ray asked softly. The boy sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "Nate," he mumbled. "Nate, you hungry?" Nate nodded, eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. Ray reached into his pocket, pulling out a slightly stale piece of bread he had saved from the day before. "Here, take this," he offered. Nate took the bread eagerly, muttering a shy thank you. Ray sat down beside him, offering what little comfort he could. "Stick with me, Nate. We'll look out for each other, okay?" Nate nodded again, his grip on the bread tightening. Ray felt a flicker of hope. In this unforgiving world, they needed to rely on each other to survive. His thoughts drifted to a dream he often held on to, a life where he didn't have to scavenge for food, where he had a warm bed and a family who cared. But for now, those dreams remained just that, dreams. Reality was the cold, hard streets and the constant struggle for survival. As night began to fall, Ray found a relatively safe spot for them to rest. He lay down beside Nate, the city's distant hum lulling him into a fitful sleep. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the sleeping city, when Ray awoke. He lay still for a moment, listening to the distant hum of early morning traffic. Nate, curled up beside him, snored softly. The previous day's events played in his mind. Finding the apple, sharing the bread, and the brief moment of camaraderie with Nate. These small victories kept him going. Ray gently nudged Nate awake. "Come on, we need to get moving," Ray whispered. Nate rubbed his eyes and nodded, his face still groggy with sleep. They gathered their few belongings and set off, the cold air biting at their exposed skin. Ray's stomach growled loudly, reminding him of the endless search for food. They wandered through the familiar streets, avoiding the more hostile parts of the city. Ray's eyes scanned the ground, hoping to find something, anything, to stave off the hunger. As they approached the affluent part of the city, Ray's heart pounded a little faster. The contrast between the lavish mansions and their ragged existence was stark and unforgiving. Ray steered Nate towards a narrow alley, hoping it might yield something useful. The alley was quiet, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Suddenly, a glint of something shiny caught Ray's eye. He moved closer and found a leather portfolio half hidden behind a trash bin. His heart skipped a beat as he picked it up and examined it. The leather was worn but intact, the kind of thing that screamed importance. Ray's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the portfolio. Inside, he found a stack of documents, all neatly organized. As he skimmed through them, words like deed and property stood out. Each document bore the name Paul Gomez, a name that Ray had heard whispered among the street dwellers, rumored to be one of the wealthiest men in the city. Ray's mind raced. These papers must be worth a fortune. The weight of the decision settled heavily on his shoulders. "Ray, what's that?" Nate asked, peering over his shoulder. "Just some papers," Ray replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "What are you going to do with them?" Ray hesitated. "I don't know yet." The thought of selling the documents for money was tempting. It could mean days, maybe even weeks, of food and safety. But another part of him whispered that it wasn't right. These documents belonged to someone, and taking advantage of that would be wrong. "Maybe we could sell them," Nate suggested, eyes wide with hope. Ray shook his head. "No, Nate, they don't belong to us. It's not right." "But we need the money," Nate argued, his voice rising. "We're hungry, Ray." "I know we are," Ray said, trying to keep his voice calm. "But stealing isn't the answer. We have to find another way." Nate's face fell, frustration evident in his eyes. "You always say that, but nothing changes. We're still hungry and cold." Ray sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility heavy on his young shoulders. "I'm going to return these papers. Maybe, just maybe, the owner will help us in return." Nate looked at him skeptically. "And if he doesn't?" "Then at least we'll know we did the right thing," Ray replied firmly. "Come on, let's go." The decision made, Ray clutched the portfolio tightly and led Nate out of the alley. They walked through the pristine streets, the grandeur of the mansions looming over them. Ray's heart pounded with each step, uncertainty gnawing at him. What if the owner didn't care? What if he accused them of stealing? Finally, they reached the imposing gates of a mansion that could only belong to someone as important as Paul Gomez. Ray took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button, his palms sweaty with anxiety. "Yes?" A stern voice crackled through the speaker. Hello. My name is Ray," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "I found something that belongs to Mr. Gomez. Can I speak with him?" There was a long pause, during which Ray's heart threatened to beat out of his chest. Then the gate slowly creaked open. "Come in," the voice instructed. Ray exchanged a nervous glance with Nate, who squeezed his hand for reassurance. The gate creaked open, and Ray exchanged a nervous glance with Nate, who squeezed his hand for reassurance. Together they stepped through, unaware of the chain of events they had just set into motion. The grandeur of the mansion was overwhelming. Ray's steps faltered as they approached the front door, its imposing size making him feel smaller than ever. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. He had made the decision to return the documents, and now he had to see it through. "Are you sure about this?" Nate whispered, his voice filled with doubt. Ray nodded, though his resolve wavered. "Yes, we have to do what's right." He raised his hand and knocked on the heavy door. Moments later, it swung open to reveal a tall, stern-faced butler. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in Ray's ragged appearance and the portfolio clutched in his hands. "Yes," the butler said, his tone laced with suspicion. Hello. My name is Ray," he began, his voice trembling slightly. "I found this portfolio. It belongs to Mr. Gomez." The butler's eyes flicked to the portfolio and back to Ray. "And you decided to bring it here?" Ray nodded, trying to maintain eye contact despite his nerves. "Yes, sir. It didn't feel right to keep it." The butler's expression softened, just a fraction. "Wait here," he instructed, taking the portfolio from Ray's hands. He disappeared into the house, leaving the two boys standing on the doorstep. "What if they think we stole it?" Nate whispered anxiously. Ray shook his head, trying to reassure him. "We didn't. We did the right thing." A few tense minutes later, the butler returned, gesturing for them to enter. They stepped into the grand foyer, the opulence of the interior striking them silent. The butler led them through a series of rooms until they reached a study, where a man sat behind a large wooden desk. "Mr. Gomez, these are the boys who brought back your portfolio," the butler announced. Paul Gomez looked up from his paperwork, his gaze piercing as he studied Ray and Nate. Ray swallowed hard, his palms sweaty with anxiety. "Thank you, James," Paul said to the butler, who nodded and left the room. Turning his attention to the boys, Paul's expression was unreadable. "So, you found my portfolio?" "Yes, sir," Ray replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "It was in an alley. I thought you'd want it back." Paul opened the portfolio and examined the documents inside. Satisfied, he closed it and looked back at Ray. "You didn't take anything?" "No, sir," Ray said firmly. "I thought it was important to return it as it was." Paul leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And why didn't you keep it? Surely you could have sold these documents for a lot of money." Ray felt a surge of indignation at the suggestion. "Because it wouldn't have been right. They're not mine." Paul's stern expression softened into something resembling curiosity. "You're an honest boy, Ray. That's a rare quality." Ray shrugged, his gaze dropping to the floor. "I just did what I thought was right." Nate, sensing the tension, spoke up. "We're just hungry, sir. Ray thought maybe you could help us." Paul's eyes flicked to Nate and then back to Ray. He could see the exhaustion and desperation in their faces. "Help you how?" "We're not asking for much," Ray said quickly. "Just some food, maybe a place to sleep for the night." Paul studied them for a moment longer before nodding. "Very well. James will show you to the kitchen. You can eat and rest for now." The boys exchanged a look of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Gomez," Ray said earnestly. Paul nodded, watching as James re-entered and led the boys away. Ray could hardly believe what was happening. Just hours ago, he had been scavenging for food, and now he was sitting in a luxurious dining room, the scent of freshly cooked food filling the air. The chandelier above cast a warm glow over the room, and the polished wood table seemed to stretch on forever. Ray's eyes widened as he took in the opulence of his surroundings. It was like stepping into a different world. Nate, sitting beside him, looked equally stunned. They both glanced at each other, not quite sure if this was real. Paul sat across from them, watching their reactions with a gentle smile. "Eat," Paul said, his voice kind but firm. "You both must be starving." The boys didn't need to be told twice. They eagerly dug into the food, savoring every bite. The flavors were rich and comforting, a stark contrast to the scraps they were used to finding. As he ate, Ray's mind raced. Why was this man being so kind? What did he want in return? After the meal, Paul leaned back in his chair, studying Ray with a thoughtful expression. "You're probably wondering why I'm doing this." Ray paused, a fork halfway to his mouth, and nodded. "Yes, sir. It's not something we're used to." Paul sighed, his gaze distant for a moment. "I see a lot of myself in you, Ray. I didn't have an easy start in life either. Someone helped me once, and it changed everything. I want to do the same for you." Ray felt a flicker of hope, but also suspicion. "But why us? You don't even know us." Paul leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Because you've shown more honesty and integrity than many people do in their entire lives. You could have sold those documents, but you didn't. That tells me you're worth helping." Ray exchanged a glance with Nate, who looked as bewildered as he felt. The offer seemed too good to be true, but there was a sincerity in Paul's eyes that Ray couldn't ignore. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Paul replied, leaning back again. "I just want you to know that you're welcome here. You can stay as long as you need to." The boys were shown to a guest room, each with a bed that seemed impossibly soft and warm. Ray lay down, feeling the weight of the day's events settle over him. He was exhausted, but his mind wouldn't stop racing. Could they really trust Paul? "Ray," Nate whispered from the other bed, "do you think we're safe here?" Ray sighed, staring up at the ceiling. "I don't know, Nate, but for now we have food and a bed. Let's just take it one day at a time." The next morning the boys were greeted by the smell of breakfast. As they ate, Paul joined them, his demeanor warm and inviting. He asked them about their lives, their hopes, and their dreams. Ray found himself opening up, sharing more than he had with anyone in a long time. "What do you want to do, Ray?" Paul asked, genuinely interested. "If you could do anything, what would it be?" Ray hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've always wanted to go to school, to learn, to have a chance at something better." Paul nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "And you, Nate?" Nate looked up, a shy smile on his face. "I just want a family. People who care about me." Paul's expression softened, and he reached out to gently squeeze Nate's hand. "You both deserve those things, and I want to help you achieve them." Ray's heart pounded. This was more than he had ever dared to hope for. "Why are you doing this for us?" Paul smiled, a hint of sadness in his eyes. "Because someone once did it for me, and because I believe everyone deserves a chance, especially honest, good-hearted boys like you." Ray felt a lump in his throat. The sincerity in Paul's words was undeniable. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. He glanced at Nate, who looked back with a hopeful smile. It was a new beginning, and despite his fears and doubts, Ray felt a spark of hope. As the days passed, Ray and Nate started to feel more at home. Paul's kindness never wavered, and slowly, the boys began to trust him. Ray's eyes fluttered open to the soft light streaming through the large windows. The first morning in the mansion felt surreal. He lay still for a moment, soaking in the warmth of the soft bed, a stark contrast to the cold, hard ground he was used to. He turned his head and saw Nate still asleep, looking peaceful and content. Ray slowly sat up, the luxurious surroundings still overwhelming. Every detail of the room, from the ornate furniture to the elegant drapes, felt like a dream. He took a deep breath and decided to explore the house a bit more. As he stepped out into the hallway, he felt a mixture of awe and unease. The grandeur of the mansion was intimidating, but there was also a strange sense of comfort. He wandered down the hallway, admiring the paintings and the intricate design of the architecture. "Good morning, Ray," Paul's voice echoed from the other end of the hallway. Ray turned to see Paul walking towards him with a warm smile. "Good morning, sir," Ray replied, still feeling a bit out of place. "Did you sleep well?" Paul asked, genuinely concerned. "Yes, very well." "Thank you," Ray said, trying to hide his nervousness. Paul placed a reassuring hand on Ray's shoulder. "There's something I'd like to discuss with you. Let's have breakfast first." They made their way to the dining room where Nate was already seated, eagerly awaiting the meal. The breakfast spread was impressive, with fresh fruit, pastries and warm dishes that made Ray's stomach growl. As they ate, Paul began to speak. "Ray, I've been thinking about your future. I want to enroll you in school. You deserve an education and the chance to build a better life." Ray's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "School? But I've never been to school before. What if I can't keep up?" "You're a smart boy, Ray. You'll do just fine, and I'll be here to help you every step of the way," Paul reassured him. Nate looked up, excitement in his eyes. "Does that mean I can go to school too?" Paul smiled. "Of course, Nate. Both of you deserve this opportunity." The thought of going to school filled Ray with both excitement and fear. It was a chance to learn, to grow, but also a step into the unknown. After breakfast, Paul drove them to the nearby school to complete the enrollment process. The school was large, with bustling hallways filled with students. Ray felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. The principal greeted them warmly and gave them a tour of the school. The next few days were challenging. Ray struggled to keep up with the lessons, and his classmates' curious stares made him uncomfortable. One afternoon, he sat in the library, books spread out before him, trying to make sense of the math problems. "Need some help?" A voice broke through his frustration. Ray looked up to see a girl about his age with bright eyes and a friendly smile. Yeah, I'm just having a hard time with this," Ray admitted, feeling embarrassed. She sat down beside him and began to explain the problems patiently. Ray listened, grateful for her help. "I'm Sarah, by the way." "Ray, thanks for helping me, Sarah." "No problem. Everyone struggles at first. You'll get the hang of it," she said, with an encouraging smile. Despite the initial difficulties, Ray's determination to make the most of his new opportunities grew. Paul's support never wavered. He spent evenings helping Ray with his homework, sharing stories from his own life to inspire and motivate him. One evening, after a particularly tough day, Ray voiced his frustrations. "What if I never fit in? What if I never catch up?" Paul looked at him with understanding. "Ray, it's okay to struggle. What matters is that you keep trying. You're not alone in this. We'll face these challenges together." Ray nodded, feeling a sense of reassurance. Paul's words and actions made him feel valued and supported in a way he had never experienced before. As weeks turned into months, Ray began to adapt. His grades improved, and he started making friends. The bond between him, Nate, and Paul grew stronger. The bond between Ray, Nate, and Paul grew stronger as months passed. Ray's initial awe and unease transformed into a sense of belonging and hope. But this newfound stability was about to be tested in the most harrowing way. It was a sunny afternoon when Ray's past came crashing into his present. He was walking home from school, enjoying the rare moment of peace. The sound of screeching tires jolted him from his thoughts. Before he could react, a pair of rough hands grabbed him, pulling him into a dark van. He fought, kicking and screaming, but the van doors slammed shut and the vehicle sped away. As the hours passed and the sun set, Paul began to worry. It was unlike Ray to be late without informing anyone. He paced the length of the grand foyer, glancing at the clock repeatedly. His anxiety grew with each passing minute. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he called for James, his trusted butler. "James, Ray isn't back yet. It's getting late and I'm worried. Send out a few of the staff to ask around the neighborhood and check with his friends. We need to find him." James nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He quickly organized a search, sending out several staff members to look for Ray. They scoured the streets, asking anyone they encountered if they had seen the boy. But as the night deepened, there was still no sign of Ray. Paul's phone rang, shattering the tense silence. He grabbed it, hoping for news. Instead, a raspy, threatening voice greeted him. "I have your boy. If you want him back, you'll do exactly what I say." Paul's heart pounded, but his voice remained steady. "What do you want?" "Money. Lots of it. And don't you dare involve the police or you'll never see him again." As the call ended, Paul's mind raced. Panic threatened to overtake him, but he pushed it down. Ray needed him to be calm and collected. He immediately called his trusted friend, Detective Alvarez. "Alvarez, it's Paul. Ray's been kidnapped. I need your help, but we have to be discreet." "Understood," Alvarez replied. "Stay calm and follow my instructions. We'll get him back." Paul gathered his closest staff, explaining the situation briefly and assigning roles. They would pretend to comply with the kidnapper's demands while Alvarez and his team worked behind the scenes. In the van, Ray struggled against the ropes binding his wrists. He recognized the voice of his captor, his father. The man reeked of alcohol and desperation. "Why are you doing this?" Ray demanded, his voice shaking with anger. "Shut up, boy! You're my ticket out of this miserable life," his father snarled. "You're using me! You don't care about me!" Ray yelled, tears of frustration blurring his vision. "Watch your mouth!" His father slapped him, and the van fell silent, except for Ray's heavy breathing and the rumble of the engine. Despite the fear, Ray's mind was sharp. He had to find a way to leave clues for Paul and the police. As the van slowed down, likely approaching a stop, he managed to wriggle free a small piece of cloth from his shirt and let it drop onto the floor, hoping it would be found. Back at the mansion, Paul was pacing the floor, phone in hand. Alvarez called to update him. "We've tracked the call. They're heading towards the industrial area. We're moving in, but we need more time." Paul gripped the phone tightly. "I'll stall him. Just get my boy back." The kidnapper's phone rang, and Paul's voice filled the van. "I have the money. Where do you want to meet?" His father grabbed the phone. "Drive to the old warehouse on 5th. Come alone." As the van arrived at the warehouse, Ray's heart pounded. His father shoved him out, keeping a firm grip on his arm. The warehouse was dark and deserted. Paul arrived shortly after, a briefcase in hand. He stepped out of his car, his face a mask of calm determination. "I'm here. Let Ray go." "Show me the money first," Ray's father demanded. Paul opened the briefcase, revealing stacks of cash. "Here it is. Now release him." His father pushed Ray forward, but kept a tight hold on his arm. "Not so fast. You think I'm stupid? I need to get out of here first." Suddenly, The sound of sirens filled the air. Ray's father panicked, tightening his grip on Ray. "You called the cops? I'll kill him!" Paul's voice was firm. "No, you won't. If you harm him, you get nothing. Let him go, and I promise you'll be treated fairly." The standoff was tense. Ray's father's eyes darted around, looking for an escape. In a swift move, he tried to drag Ray towards the van, but Alvarez and his team emerged from the shadows, guns drawn. "Drop the weapon and release the boy," Alvarez commanded. Cornered and desperate, Ray's father loosened his grip. Ray seized the moment, elbowing him hard and breaking free. He ran towards Paul, who enveloped him in a protective embrace. "Are you okay?" Paul asked, his voice filled with concern. Ray nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I was scared." Alvarez and his team moved in, arresting Ray's father. The man's angry shouts echoed in the warehouse, but they faded as he was led away. Back at the mansion, Ray sat in Paul's study, a warm cup of tea in his hands. He felt exhausted but safe. Paul sat beside him, a mix of relief and anger in his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me about your father?" Paul asked gently. Ray looked down, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't think he'd come back. I thought I was safe." Paul sighed, placing a reassuring hand on Ray's shoulder. "You're safe now. We'll make sure of it." Ray smiled, feeling a deep sense of belonging. Despite the trauma, he knew he had a future filled with hope and love. Paul's resolve to secure Ray's future solidified the moment they returned to the mansion. The very next day, he contacted his lawyer to begin the legal process of adopting both Ray and Nate. The first meeting with the lawyer was a mixture of formalities and heartfelt intentions. "Mr. Gomez, adopting 2 children requires a significant amount of paperwork and time," the lawyer explained. "I understand," Paul replied, his voice steady. "But these boys deserve a stable, loving home, and I am committed to providing that for them." Ray and Nate sat quietly, absorbing the gravity of what was happening. Paul's dedication was evident, and it filled Ray with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Days turned into weeks as the legal process moved forward. Paul's mansion buzzed with a different kind of activity, preparations for the boys' official adoption. Paul ensured that Ray and Nate were involved in every step, from choosing their room's new decor to discussing their future education plans. One afternoon, as they sat in Paul's study, Ray voiced his concerns. What if something goes wrong? What if they don't let you adopt us?" Paul looked at Ray with unwavering confidence. "Nothing will go wrong, Ray. I've already made sure of it. You and Nate are my sons, and soon it will be official." Nate, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. "Are you sure? We've always been on our own. It's hard to believe this is real." Paul smiled warmly. "I understand, Nate. But I promise you this is real. You both belong here, with me." The days passed slowly, filled with anticipation and a tinge of anxiety. Finally, the day of the court hearing arrived. Paul, Ray, and Nate walked into the courtroom, hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and fear. The judge, a stern yet kind woman, reviewed the case files before addressing them. "Mr. Gomez, I see you filed for the adoption of Ray and Nate. Can you explain why you wish to adopt these boys?" the judge asked. Paul stood tall, his voice filled with conviction. "Your Honor, Ray and Nate have faced more hardships in their young lives than most people can imagine. They deserve stability, love, and a chance to build a future. I've come to care for them deeply, and I am committed to providing them with a home where they can grow and thrive." The judge turned to Ray and Nate. "And how do you boys feel about this adoption?" Ray took a deep breath. "We want to be a family. Paul has been more of a father to us than anyone else ever has. We feel safe with him." Nate nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "We want this. We want to stay with him." The judge smiled softly. "Very well. It's clear that this is a loving and committed family. I hereby grant the adoption request. Ray and Nate, you are now legally the sons of Paul Gomez." Relief and joy washed over them. Ray and Nate hugged Paul tightly, their new legal status cementing the bond they'd already formed. In the following weeks, life at the mansion took on a new rhythm. Ray and Nate adjusted to their new reality, growing more confident and hopeful each day. Paul's presence as a father figure became a cornerstone of their lives, guiding them with patience and love. One evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Paul brought up an important event. "There's a foundation gala coming up, and I want you both to be a part of it. It's a chance for us to give back to the community and share our story." Ray looked intrigued. "What do you want us to do?" Paul smiled. "I want you to share your journey. Let people know how far you've come and how important it is to help others." The night of the gala arrived, and the mansion was filled with guests. Ray felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement. As he stood on the stage, facing the crowd, he took a deep breath and began his speech. "Good evening, everyone. My name is Ray, and this is my brother, Nate. Not long ago, we were homeless and alone. But then Paul found us, and he gave us something we never thought we'd have: a family. He taught us the value of honesty, integrity, and love. And now we want to give back. We want to help others who are in the same situation we were in. Thank you for supporting this foundation and giving us the chance to make a difference." The audience erupted in applause, and Paul's eyes shone with pride. He joined the boys on stage, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the journey of Ray and Nate, but the power of community and the importance of giving back. Together, we can change lives. Thank you all for being here and supporting this cause." As the applause continued, Ray felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He looked at Paul and Nate, knowing that their bond was unbreakable. The future was bright, filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. Hey everyone, thanks for staying till the end of the video. Let's talk a bit about the amazing story of Ray and Paul. This tale really hits home about the power of kindness and honesty. Ray, despite his tough life on the streets, chose to return valuable documents he found. That decision, driven by his honesty, changed his life forever. Paul's kindness in taking Ray and Nate in, offering them not just a place to stay but a real home, is incredibly inspiring. It's a beautiful reminder of how one person's compassion can make a world of difference. Seeing Ray and Nate grow and thrive under Paul's care and watching their bond strengthen really shows the transformative power of love and support. If you enjoyed this story as much as I did, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to ring the bell so you get notified whenever I post new stories. Your support helps me keep bringing these heartwarming tales to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Ray and Paul's journey. Have you ever witnessed or experienced an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Share your stories in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, even small acts of kindness can have a huge impact. Stay kind and keep spreading those positive vibes.